representing here a movement that is 2.5 years old, though our particular task force is just 6 months old, but the Global Partnership on Children with Disabilities that includes now over 240 organizations and works to advance the rights of children with disabilities at the global, regional, and country level. And the organization that has issued 2 important documents. This one in 2012 was a discussion paper on early childhood development disability, and these are available on the website at UNICEF or WHO. And then just this year, for the first time ever, the key report from UNICEF, the State of the World's Children, this year focused on children with disabilities. So these key documents are cause to celebrate our progress, as well as documentation of how far we have to go. And so I refer you to them for a glimpse at the literature and at the documentation that is underneath. You will see, and I think you'll even see, I hope, I'm waiting to see, if when we have the official word from UNICEF, for instance, the extent to which this piece of the strategic plan is on the table or not. But this is part of the strategic plan moving forward that has to do with inclusion in terms of the UNICEF vision. And you'll recognize there many of the same messages. And I also am aware that you have this set of slides in your mobile version of the program. So I'll be going through some of them more quickly, but you do have those available, right? You do know you have them, okay. The Global Partnership for Children with Disabilities is basically set up with a steering committee at the top, which was representatives from several of the UN agencies, World Health Organization, UNICEF, UNESCO, as well as several of the international networks of disability organizations and DPOs, disabled persons organizations. A secretariat was retained and is based at UNICEF, though this is not a UNICEF project. They want that very clearly known. UNICEF has agreed to host it in its sort of incubator period, and many of the leaders are, of course, drawn from UNICEF. And under the Secretariat, there are really 3 kinds of functions here. You see national partnerships, which I'll mention briefly, a global advocacy effort, and then the task forces. And that's where we are now. So we are one of several task forces that are operating. I'll say more about them in just a moment. But these are global. The national partnership one is important because one of the strategic goals of our task force, building on the global strategy, is just as there is now a global network in each nation, there's an effort to put together a partnership for children with disabilities. ECD task force is especially interested in forming national partnerships with countries that have either a particular capacity in early childhood and have been doing really great things, South Africa, for instance, China, for instance, several of the Latin American nations, or countries that are eager to do that. So there are national partnerships at each level, and they will be an important part of the layer of the system. And there is the beginning engagement of youth in terms of having their voices involved. Of course, the youth who are as small as the youth that we're talking about, the 0 to 3 or 8 or 10, depending on where you are coming from, do not get full participation and access to some of the youth participations. So there are, at this point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I don't know how many count, but all these task forces, I put ours at the first, the Early Childhood Development Task Force. You recognize the not surprising others. And far be it from me, but early childhood development is a part of each of these, ought not to be apart from any of them. Thus, again, one of our challenges. that we're dealing with in our strategic work as well. So inclusive early childhood development then is a way we're framing what it is we're offering to the global partnership. So the voice of what's been done in early childhood development, the notion of inclusive early childhood development. We want to use our time this morning to share with you the vision and the outcome. Ziba's comments will particularly focus on the important work done by the WHO Commission on social determinants of health and an ecological framework that she'll be describing. We will share with you a few examples of policies, programs, and research, and people sitting here are engaged in many of those programs and research at this point, and hopefully get your input on ways forward with the task force and with the global partnership. And it is a wide open process that if you want to get involved, we welcome you. If you scan this list of 21st century publications or reports about what is early childhood development, a number of things may jump out at you. That equity from the start, a powerful equalizer, stepping stone to success, breaking the poverty cycle, investing, building the wealth of nations, the underestimated component in poverty reduction. Clearly, these mantras of early childhood development that are appearing in various policy and advocacy statements all provide a very solid base for thinking about early childhood as a key, some of us think the key. I think even thinking back to the presentations this morning, I think it is the key to making the world a better place. You will also see quite striking in here, depending on your eyesight and how you see things, that the ECI, the early childhood intervention, or the special part, or the notion of children with special needs, to say nothing of special rights, special needs, remain heavily invisible in most of these reports. And we're out to change that. We're out to, it won't work. Now, we do have some problems. So we've got ECD, we've got ECE, we've got ECCE, we've got ECCD, and I think I saw another one this morning. ECDC was there. But we're all talking basically the same. Then there is the ECI, and then we also have this other set of issues that I referred to that we're among families, so we don't need to fight here about what's going to go to the 0 to 3 and what's going to go to the 3 to 5, even though when we're outside this room, we do engage in such competition for scarce resources. My own group is sort of resolved around the first decade of life as a nice way to bring us together, but just an offering and such. And this is only in English, the confusion. So imagine what happens when we go into the various languages of your settings and such. The other thing is that we are using a human rights approach to reframe the conventional approaches. And we rely on two main documents, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. You're familiar, I trust, with some of the concepts. We got a nice take this morning on best interests of the child, and if you're certainly in the US scene, we had a period of time at the end of the last century where beyond the best interests of the child became a more useful term, and Professor Wells probably would agree from the sounds of it. And you are aware that Article 23 has, in the CRC, does say a little bit about children with disabilities, along with the other matters that it addresses. And so 193 countries have signed. Signing doesn't mean they do it, but they sign. And fortunately, we have Ziba here, who's an expert on General Comment 7, that points out the way in which early childhood is the key area where identification and initial addressing of disabilities needs to be considered. And this is, again, part of what is foundational for our moving forward. And the notion that they're entitled to appropriate specialist assistance, including support for their parents or other caregivers, and that they should at all times be treated with dignity in ways that encourage their self-reliance. This becomes a kind of battle cry for our work. Now, more recently, of course, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, same kind of language, and it says a little bit about children. So we've got this convergence that's now operating, but the values, the silos, the areas, and so forth are important, that both stress international cooperation as one of the vehicles for implementation is, again, why our getting together in a global summit for childhood is so compelling. So we have the question, why invest in early childhood development? We have a developmental approach to health and well-being that many of us share from an academic or scholarly angle. We have a social equity and human rights case that we can bring to bear that feeds that developmental approach. We have the notion that economic prosperity in the world, or as Dr. Wells put it, the social reproduction matters that need to be taken, that economic prosperity is the goal for this capitalist society, as you pointed out, that ECD can be a big part of that. And I hope we could also include the notion of ethical responsibility. So we are talking about doing the right thing here, doing the right thing on behalf of children and doing the right thing on behalf of children with disabilities. I like to quote the language from the World Bank education team. They have a beautiful tagline that I use as sort of a haiku poem to capture my own approach. And you may be familiar with it. Actually, if you're not, you can learn it right now. I'll tell it to you and then we can repeat it. They say, invest early, invest smart, invest for all. Okay, so invest early, that's what we're about, early childhood. Invest smart means, evidence-based, be wise with what you're doing, be smart. And invest for all means include all children, not just the 75% who do not have a disability, but all children. So try it, you've learned it already. Invest early, invest smart, invest for all. So indeed, we have early childhood development as a powerful equalizer to help overcome the unjust health inequities seen in the world. And let me turn things over to my colleague, Ziba, to take us to the next piece.
Good morning. I'm Ziba Vagri. I come from an institute where some of you might have heard, and some of the documents Don mentioned are deliverables of our work with United Nations agencies. I'm the director of international program for that agency, for our institute, which is called Human Early Learning Partnership. It's basically a consortium of all the quote-unquote experts in one area or another of childhood. Myself, I am pediatric nutritionist, and my colleagues are different areas of pediatrics. For the last 6 or 7 years, however, the focus of my work has been my research and academic activities has been ECD, mostly a right-based approach to ECD, monitoring the implementation of Convention on the Rights of the Child as a way of enhancing the developmental outcome of early years. So with that brief intro, I'm going to talk to you about a part of our work that we did with WHO during 2000s, when WHO set up the Commissioner on Social Determinants of Health. The Commissioner was set up in response to an overwhelming amount of document that was showing us the gross inequity in health, not only across the nations, but also within nations. This is an example of some of the evidence. 5 children born in Burundi. Pierre lives to be 1 year old, Liz lives to be 36, Jean lives to be 57, and 72, Sarah 84. Conversely, 5 children born in Sweden. Per lives to be 63, Lisa 77, Jan 84, Anton 88, Sarah 93. So this brings the life expectancy of people born in Sweden to 81 versus those born in African Burundi to 50, a gross difference. While in Sweden, everybody lives to see the 7th decade of life, in Burundi, that's a luxury, that's a rare happening. Only 2 out of 5 experience that. And while dying young in Sweden means dying in 7th decade of life, dying young in Burundi means not seeing beyond first birthday. So these are some of the evidence we are all familiar with, have seen, heard, and they are heart-wrenching. But in response, and we didn't need to look too far to understand where is this coming from. If we look at the next chart, which is on y-axis, we see the income per capita, and on x-axis, we see life expectancy. It explains the differences seen easily. Burundi, with 50 years of life expectancy, falls at the lower extreme of the income per capita, whereas Sweden falls at the highest income per capita. So we all know that income has a great determining role in the health outcome of people, but income is not the only factor that has this effect. There are factors beyond income and beyond availability of health issues that have a great saying in health outcome. And to understand these factors, which are collectively referred to as social determinants of health, WHO set up Sir Michael Mermott of UK to assemble 9 centers in the world with expertise and capacity to research 9 different social determinants of health, and to understand these social determinants of health as entry points to enhance the health outcome for people. This is another example of the inequity we see. This is really good. This really illustrates the other social determinants of health. On y-axis, on x-axis, we see the level of income, and then on y-axis, we see the percent children who are vulnerable at the point of entry to school, children who are not ready to learn. This is for Canada, as you see, going from rich families to very poor families, vulnerability percentage of children increases almost 3-fold. And this is not just for Canada. You see the same trend in other developed countries and in middle income and low income countries. So in response to all these, WHO set up social determinants of health. Michael Mermott set up 9 knowledge networks with expertise in 9 different areas, such as gender equity, employment, and early child development was recognized as one of the social determinants of health. And our center was designated as Center for Early Child Development, WHO's Knowledge Network for Early Child Development. We were assigned to do 2 years of intensive research, environmental scanning, looking across the world at the best practices in the level of policies, programs, structures, processes, and to understand what really works for ECD, what is counterproductive, and how have the nations who have managed to really enhance the health of their children done this, so we can model them. And all of these nations, all of these centers put the result of their 2 years intensive research in the form of report to the commissioner, and commissioner's report, which was compilation of all these 9 reports, was printed in 2008. The report was called Closing the Gap in a Generation, which indeed was the gap in health equity that we see in countries across and within countries as well. In this report, commissioner's report, our chapter was equity from the start, which was the main author was the great Clyde Hertzman. And in this chapter, the overall, throughout the Commissioner's report, Commissioner repeated ECD as the most potent social determinant of health. If we set this report, this period right, we can manage to equalize some of the inequities that other social determinants bring upon individuals. Life course problems will show up and will get aggravated if we don't invest in ECD in the second decade in the form of school failure, teen pregnancy, criminality, third and fourth decade in the form of obesity, elevated blood pressure, depression, fifth and sixth decade in the form of coronary heart disease, diabetes, and then finally in old age as premature aging and memory loss. Even some of the very well-known conditions and disease like osteoporosis, which we have come to know them as normal wear and tear of body. Now we have enough the evidence that tells us these are geriatric disease with pediatric origins. So that talks about the humongous significance of early years to set the tone of life right for the rest of it. So in this chapter, we also introduced a framework. How can we enhance the developmental outcome of children during early years? The framework was called Total Environment Assessment Model of ECD, or abbreviated as TEEN ECD. It is a combination of number of ecological models, majorly stems from Werner's model. What the model says puts the biology of child in the middle, be it a child with typical neurology, or like one of our colleagues put it smartly as neurologically atypical child. But biology of child stands in the middle. So the model in a nutshell says that if we want to enhance the developmental outcome of early years, we have to pay attention not just to the biology of child, but to layers and layers of environment around children. The model talks that the child development is a biosocial process. So we have to pay attention to both parts of the world, the biology as well as social, and whatever experience children go through in these different environments have a big saying in the outcome of these years. So to enhance the outcome of early years, we need to enhance the quality of children's experiences within these environments, be it from most proximal environment, family environment, maternal education, maternal employment, to substance abuse, alcoholism, etc., etc. And then residential area, safety of neighborhoods, child right to play comes into under that, and then regional. Then there are non-physical environment called relational community. This is particularly important for settings like Canada, that we have lots of immigrant and refugee groups. The belief system or colonized ethnic groups that child belongs to, and then country environment, because most of the child-friendly or child-unfriendly policies comes from national level, and then global environment, of course, the safeguarding systems that we have at the global level to make sure that children's development is driven to its best possible, and the few of the treaties that Dawn mentioned, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child and Convention of Person with Disability, Rights of Person with Disability. So again, and then when we look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the international treaty that has been ratified by almost every country in this planet, so it shows that the amount of political will behind it. We see that, in fact, Convention is a blueprint to enhance the quality of these environments around children. Convention, these are just some of the articles that for every one of these environments, there is article in Convention. There are articles that addressing that specific environment, how the governments have the obligation to support families who are unable to, who are marginalized, so that the children's development is not affected. And then talks about the significance of parent, mother, or the caregiver. This is some of the work we did in British Columbia. This is mothers from lowest education to highest education. You can see that going from parents with post-secondary degree to parents with less than high school. The y-axis shows the stress level of children measured by hair cortisol level. So going from parents of educated parents to less educated parents, stress level of children triples. And these are families with the same level of income. So obviously, maternal education under the unfavorable conditions of low SES buffers children against stress. So this is just indicative of the significance of proximal environment on the developmental outcome of children. And then residential area, the outcome of our research and our reflecting the report was that children do much better. ECDs enhance when children live in mixed neighborhoods. This is a model from Brazil. You can see the posh high-rise with swimming pool in every balcony next to a slum. And this is the model that WHO now promotes, side by side, the wealthy and the poor children. Then the relational committee, we talked about ECD services, quality of ECD services, ratio of child to adult, safety of building, nurturing environment, region, nation, national environment, and the global environment. And under global environment in the report, we put the message that as the impact of ECD always goes beyond borders, and it's especially in this today's globalized world, it's always impacting inside and outside country. So should be our efforts. So we should come together, make global alliances, and work on enhancing the outcome of early years for children. A unified international ECD monitoring mechanism is a preferred way to go with, and then working on with the internationally recognized conventions such as Convention on the Rights of the Child or Convention of People with Rights of People with Disability is a way for monitoring the accountability of the states to the children. And these are some of the examples that Convention on the Rights of the Child protects every component of this model. For biological child, it talks Article 6 for children's right to live and life and survival. For family, Article 27 puts the obligation of states to support families. For residential area, Article 31 articulates clear right of children for play, leisure, and activity and rest. Relational community, Article 30, right of child to belong to minority or indigenous group. And ECD services, Article 29, children's education should develop each child's personality, talent, and ability to the fullest. At the national level, the governments should protect children from child labor under Article 32, from drug abuse, Article 33, sexual exploitation, Article 34, abduction, sale, and trafficking, Article 35. And lastly, under global environment, to make sure that the global environment is conducive to enhance the ECD, Article 43 to 54, all sets of articles talks about how the governments should come together and work with international organizations like UNICEF to ensure children are protected in their rights.
One of the things that we'll be doing under the Global Partnership for Children with Disabilities is to articulate the same kinds of monitoring and accountability formats for children with disabilities that we've had 20 years, well, we haven't had 20 years to do it, but since General Comment 7, which, and you began your work. So we've had a bit of time to know how to do that. And again, with particular importance of the early childhood element of that, that will be part of the agenda. So I think if I captured both the articulation of monitoring and accountability of the new convention, and also the importance of how are children with disabilities going to be recognized in the post-2015 MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, that's the hot topic of the moment, and again, the place where our work focuses. So I wanted to take from some of the conceptual tools that we've presented here and the framework, and just to get a little more nitty-gritty and to consider some of the kind of professional development, technical assistant kind of work that the Early Childhood Development Task Force will be involved in. So I move now. We've had some, the report from WHO in 2008. Then I mentioned the 2 early childhood ones in 2012 and 2013, the State of the World's Children. And hot off the presses just in January of 2014 is this particular monograph focused on, under the PEPFAR program, so focused on children affected by AIDS, and unfortunately the official United States language of orphans and vulnerable children, but that was also interesting to hear in terms of this morning's presentation. But this brief was released just a few months ago, and among the topics are efforts to articulate the linkages among HIV, disabilities, orphans and vulnerable children, or we are in the process of changing that in the United States to children in adversity. I think it's a little better, but it's probably got its own problems. And looking at disability rights, the notion of triple twin tracking, which I'm going to expand on a little bit because it's a newer concept, and then concrete tools for program elements and quality indicators. That monograph also includes portraits drawn from sub-Saharan Africa at looking at how inclusion is working in some of those nations, and a nice list of tools and resources that will be relevant to the material we're talking about. So let me first do the conceptual tool of triple twin tracking, which is a particular way in which the early childhood development headset is going to enhance and improve general efforts for inclusion. We know in early childhood, and most of the development world knows, and now I'm shifting to the other vocabulary development in terms of international development, poverty eradication, about this first track. The first track recognizes that you need universal services and you need specialized services. And that's captured pretty well. We in early childhood can also point out that to have a good program, you also need to have a good balance between what's child-centered and what's family-focused and community-based. There is such a thing as being too child-centered because you begin to think that there is such a thing as a child, which of course there is not. They don't come as children, they come in the packages that we were mentioning. And then the third issue, which we in early childhood have learned over and over again, is you need to have both child and youth appropriate kinds of frameworks, as well as the particulars of early childhood. That yes, not only are children not small adults, but young children are not just young teenagers. And so the combination of the specialized and the universal. So the place where it's pretty well understood is in this first notion of if we can take existing services and develop better special services, that's twin track number one. And it's also very often called mainstreaming disability. Unfortunate because, at least in the US framework, we're trying to get away from the term mainstreaming because it's a 20th century concept and keep focus on inclusion, but different worlds have different timetables. But the track one is fairly well appreciated in at least the upper echelons of the development world. It's a little more difficult when we get to double twin tracking. So here we're moving to twin track number 2, and we're going to be concerned with both child-centered programs as well as family-centered program. So you can do good work with just one twin track, but if you want to do really good work, you've got to be doing both twin tracks. And hold on, because I'm going to suggest that 2 is not enough either, but just to see if you're together with me at this point that we've got mainstreaming of disability, so we need general services and policies as well as special services and policies, pardon the word special. We need child-centered for twin track 2, as well as recognition that children only occur in family and community contexts. So those have to be simultaneously tracked. And then we move to triple twin tracking once we introduce the notion that there is a special knowledge base and set of practices that work with babies and toddlers and preschool children that work in the first decade of life, alongside the need to recognize children and youth as a particular population. So maybe it should be called, instead of triple twin tracking, triple twin juggling, but the notion would be that these 3 areas need to be harmonized simultaneously in order to do good work. And this is one way to, to baffle and perplex those who are doing the work, because they may have heard about one or another or the third of those twin tracks and be quite comfortable in their work. And the challenge is, well, if you want to raise your work to a quality level for inclusion of young children with special needs, you actually need to be juggling all 3. You can't just twin track, but you have to triple twin track. Now, even in this group, the notion of twin tracking, how many folks use that in their day-to-day work? So not even in our enlightened group here, that language from the world of UN, the world of all the USAID and so forth, is not part. So this twin tracking, the notion of twin track 2, child-centered, as well as family and community, probably more of us use that. And the notion of our special early childhood, as well as fitting into regular educational policy, that we probably are familiar with. So this triple twin tracking is one of the conceptual tools that we are finding is useful and important in moving forward. Now I want to shift to another area, and you'll have many opportunities at the summit to look at different perspectives on this, and I'll just share one. In fact, there's a handout on the table of this one tool that's offered in that monogram. So one of the tools that is offered for your consideration, has been offered in the technical brief, is the Early Childhood Quality Inclusion Profile, a QUIP. And it has 11 factors which are assessed in a kind of reflective assessment process. It is compatible with the other instruments that you'll be hearing about throughout the meeting, the global guidelines, the GROW, and as well as other ones that are supported in different governments and such. But this involves program folks engaging in a reflective and assessment process, generating evidence for these various areas to assess and to improve the inclusion quality of their program. Is it a developmental systems framework? Is there a human rights-based approach? Quite interesting in the Jewish community, but it's another day, another story. Does it coordinate across sectors and levels, or is it totally siloed, as they usually are? Are triple twin tracks being juggled or harmonized, as we've talked about? Do we have a focus on enabling, supporting, empowering caregivers and parents? Is it focused on preventing institutionalization? And again, the State of the World's Children Report has become a very strong document in implementing a focus on tearing down the walls of these institutions in Europe and in Asia in particular, a different bit of the issue in some African nations and so forth. Does the program increase local capacity to support the teamwork that's involved? Is it culturally responsive and humble? Is it evidence-based and evidence-informed? Is it smart? And does it have a strong evaluation system with continuous improvement links to the program or policy, as well as dissemination, sharing it with others instead of the isolation with which much of this work has done? And has it been subjected to the kind of ethical analysis that certainly our speaker this morning, if you weren't thinking ethics before you came in this morning, I think you might be thinking ethics now. And here our colleagues from the medical community have such a great advantage in terms of, above all else, do no harm. And if we were to apply that to our work. So that's offered for you. There's a handout on the back table if you want to look at that as well. I think what I'd like to do is, rather than look at some of these program functions, and you have your slides to do this, and in addition to consideration of the action principles that Brown and Uralnik have published that focus on how advocacy work and early intervention inclusion can be done, that you can take a look at those, or we can come back to them in the discussion. But I'd like to move us on to some opportunity to get a summary and some feedback from you folks, questions, comments about this material.
Thank you so much to Don Weirdlip and Ziba Bagri for a very engaging and important presentation. And where I would like to summarize with just 5 take-home points. And for those of you who came in a little bit later as well, but I really appreciated how you sort of integrated all the principles and the framework with the way to implement and carry on with the proposed changes. So number 1 point, once again, and you've heard it probably many times during this summit, is about inclusion being a part of and not a part from, and it's the society that many times excludes the person with a disability. And that is what it becomes, a person with a challenge, and that is what becomes a disability. Number 2, really reiterating the rights of children as individuals and ratified by United Nations conventions and represented once again by this network of initiatives through the global partnerships of children with disabilities. Point number 3, expanding the scope of early childhood initiatives. So coming from a human rights approach, where you're looking now at a lifetime vision. So we try to move away from not only the many acronyms, but also from the birth to 3, 3 to 5, and it's like, how do we have this continuity? And situating this within an ecological framework that Ziba expanded on. So moving from the relational aspect from child and family to the larger community, program, society, nations, and the policies that inform them. And moreover, with the summaries, Ziba, that you presented on the cutting edge research that is really bringing on all these notions that they are trying to talk right now about epigenetics and, you know, the early influences and how they stay forever. So pediatric conditions that then become geriatric conditions. So the next point, the point number 4 that I wanted to bring was how to all of these previous aspects, it's added for the early child development and inclusion, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. That I connect with the whole point, again, brought in this presentation about the need to recognize how social inequities play a large role and that we know about them, but with the notion of early child development as a powerful equalizer, they really help to bridge and to close that gap. And finally, closing with Don's model, early childhood quality inclusion profile, it's making it happen. How do we make them happen? To adding to this twin tracking system of children and families, a whole model that promotes the acknowledgement of disability in a broader concept of health, medical development, lifespan vision, and ensures that the services are embedded not only for special needs, but in a concept of, universal services. So without further ado, any questions, comments for our wonderful speakers? But first, a big round of applause for both of them.